Mic check. Okay, good. It works. Thank you guys so much for coming today for our event. I really appreciate it, and thank you to Brian and his crew for entertaining us with some music. So thank you guys for joining us for our afternoon with Silas House. I'm Miriam Adarat. I'm a librarian and a collection services manager here at the library. So we're going to begin with our program, a short conversation with Silas House between Heather Pritchard and Silas. So Heather is a librarian at the Tates Creek branch, and she's been a librarian for about 33 years with us. And she has mentored so many staff here at the library, including myself. And Silas, although he needs no introduction, I'll give a brief one. He is a nationally best-selling author of the novels Clay's Quilt, A Parchment of Leaves, The Cold Tattoo, Eli the Good, Southernmost, and Lark Ascending, just to name a few. He is the current Poet Laureate of Kentucky and Associate Professor of Appalachian Studies at Berea College. After we get to know Silas, we will begin our table reading of his short story, Another Country. This story is set in Appalachian Town in eastern Kentucky. It's inspired by James Joyce's The Dead. Another Country is about the ache of coming home and not recognizing where you fit in. It's a story about a community gathered for Old Christmas, conjuring up the past and struggling with what it means to the present and the future. So get comfortable and take your seats. We want to try to fill in. There's a few empty spots here, so if we can get more people seated up front. So get comfortable, and I'll send it over to Heather Pritchard and Silas House.
Good afternoon, everybody. Glad you're here. Let me see if I can get myself. This is so exciting. This came to fruition. You, Silas, have had a very busy term as Kentucky's Poet Laureate. You've done so much stuff. Could you talk?
I can't hear you. Bring the mic to
Look closer.
Okay. Can you hear me? Oh, yeah, there it is. You've had a very busy term as Kentucky's Poet Laureate. Could you talk about what's on the horizon for you in 2025 when you leave that station?
I'm always working on 3 or 4 projects at once. I have a new book coming out I think it'll be in the fall, and it's actually a murder mystery, which is something really different for me. And it will be published under SD House instead of Silas House to sort of differentiate between my literary writing and my murder mystery series, because I have like 4 of these books in my mind. And then I hope I have my new novel finished in time for it to be out in 26. I have a picture book coming out in late 26 about my beagle, who is too tenderhearted to hunt. And I'm working on a couple of plays. Right now, I'm trying to turn this story that we're going to do the table read of into a play. So maybe it will be produced next Christmas time, I hope.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm not happy unless I'm writing, unless I'm, working on something.
Yeah.
But I've loved being poet laureate, especially under Governor Beshear, who, supports the arts so well, and to represent the Commonwealth all over the country and just let people know that we have such a rich literary heritage, because they all think we can't read, And so I love being able to be an evangelist in that way.
Mm-hmm.
I was raised to be a preacher, but I turned out to be a different kind of preacher, I think.
Yeah. Well, you've certainly taken that mission of poet laureate, I think, farther than most of the others or any of the others I'm aware of have. So I appreciate that. I remember you wanted to do more with educating.
Mm-hmm.
And do you feel like have you hit all the things you hope to do as poet laureate?
Well, I think one part of my visibility has been the administration,
Mm-hmm.
really using poet laureate. And Crystal Wilkinson and I have both
Mm-hmm.
been poet laureates under Governor Beshear. Of course, Crystal was poet laureate during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And so she wasn't able to be out in the public as much as I have been able to.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of that has been because of how seriously this administration takes the role. And so I really, appreciate them for that. They've renewed my faith in government to see how well
Wow.
they work,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good deal. Yeah. Excellent. And so, as Miriam said, this story, Another Country, was written as an adaptation of James Joyce's short story, The Dead. That's
Mhm.
from his collection, The Dubliners. When I was an undergrad, we read The Dubliners because it was the most accessible James Joyce.
The only accessible.
But for you, why that story? And
It's the greatest short story ever written, first of all, but
Yeah.
also thematically, it just plays so well to pick it up and put it in contemporary Appalachia.
Mhm.
Well, this story came out about 10 years ago, I
Mhm.
believe. It was published in Blackbird, which is a magazine out of Virginia Commonwealth University, I believe, some university in Virginia. And so at the time, you'll see a lot of mentions of like the fight against mountaintop removal and things like that. So it would be set more like 2010, 2012, somewhere in there. And the themes of The Dead, James Joyce's The Dead, is a lot about nationalism, Ireland trying to find its independence, Ireland being colonized by the English, and Appalachia is an internal colony to some degrees. The way that it has been sacrificed for the rest of the country and the way it's been treated. And so I'm examining some of that in the story, the way that one way that you're able to take people's natural resources is by pitting them against each other. And no matter where you go in the world, that happens. And it's certainly happened in Appalachia. And so that's one element of it. Also, it's a story that uses omniscience, which I find incredibly hard to do. And so you'll see it floating in and out of different characters' minds, points of view, but it's mostly in the point of view of Gabe. So at a certain point, you'll see when it becomes all Gabe's point of view, and that's mostly when he's just sort of mean-hearted about everything, the way he's viewing everybody and everything.
Mhm.
But we are sometimes in the maid Lily or Lily's mind. She's a maid in James Joyce's story. In this, she's just a granddaughter, who's doing the chores and things like that. So it's just, I loved doing it. And it just seemed to work. and I'm happy with the way it turned out.
Mhm.
I'm not always, but this one I really like the way it turned out, and so I can't take any credit for it because I'm just rewriting Joyce. How can you go wrong there? You can go very
Yeah.
wrong, but yeah.
Yeah. And you said you have more plans for this adaptation.
Yeah, I would love for it to be a stage play. Yeah.
And so what we're doing today, you would call it maybe a table reading or a
Yes.
staged reading. You've written
Yeah.
other plays.
I'm reading all the narrative of the short story, and then the dialogue will all be read by different cast members. So basically, we've mostly taken out the he said, she said. And so you won't all, you'll just see the person speaking instead of being told that they're going to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because I'm a librarian, I have to ask this question or I'll lose my credibility. What are you reading right now? What would you?
Well, I'm writing a novel. I'm finishing a novel right now, set in mostly from the 1920s, a little bit into the 1960s in Eastern Kentucky. And so I'm doing a tremendous amount of research. So I'm reading a lot of stuff like that. So I want to shine a light on the best book I read this year instead. It's called The History of Sound by Ben Shattuck. Has anybody read it yet? It's pretty new. And it is a book of interconnected short stories, which I don't always love short stories. I love a novel usually when I'm reading fiction. I don't want to read a whole collection. I like to read the short stories individually. Anyway, this book is brilliant and just beautiful, and I can't recommend it highly enough. The History of Sound. Yeah.
Thank you for reaching out for short stories. As a librarian, I can
Yeah.
also say they don't check out
Right.
as well, although they're really a great way to spend an afternoon.
Mhm.
Not a lot of commitment, guys, but really a lot of bang for your buck. So
Yeah. And that's the thing is usually I'll read a short story and then I'll put the book away and I'll go back a year later, read another. This book, you have to read the whole book, even though they're short stories, but you won't want to not read them.
Yeah, I'll put it on my list. And I think it's time we should perform. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Thank you so much, Heather. Thanks for
so much
being
pleasure.
here.
Yeah, this is great. Well,
All right.
come here.
Thanks. Thank you all for being here. There it is. All right, I'll turn it over to y'all. Lily was worn out from a solid hour of ferrying coats to the back bedroom and greeting folks at the front door. Hardly had she brought one uncle or cousin into the living room than another was letting in cold air and slanting snow when they stood too long with the door open. The bed was piled teetering high with coats now. Lily knew that everyone had arrived except her uncle, Gabe, and his wife, Greta. They seemed to be the most desired guests of all. Her grandmother, Sada, and great aunt Opal chirped like little birds as they twittered about, but one of them was constantly poking her head into the foyer to ask if Gabe had made it yet. Everybody loved the Morgan sisters' Christmas gathering. Usually it was held on Christmas Eve, but this year Opal had been in the hospital, pneumonia, so Sada had tended to her all through the holidays. As soon as Opal was released on New Year's Eve, Sada had started planning a way to make up the annual get-together. When she lit on the idea to do it on Old Christmas, she could hardly contain her excitement. She had always wanted to have an old Christmas party, People never celebrated that anymore. Most young people didn't even know what January 6th meant. So they had called all of their closest family and told a few of the neighbors on Free Creek who were like family. And here they were, all crowded into the house on the evening when magic happened. Seda and Opal had lived together in the little house at the mouth of Free Creek ever since Seda's husband passed away 25 years ago, dead in the Dublin coal disaster. Opal never had married. Her motto, spoken with fists planted on her hips, I don't need no man, and never did. But the sisters had always needed each other. They both drew a small pension from their years of hard work. Opal at the yarn factory, and Seda as a teacher at the Bray Elementary School, where she had given 33 years of her life as a music teacher. But they had saved for weeks to put on the Christmas celebration. They were proud to be able to provide a huge supper tonight. The Morgan sisters worshipped Gabe, a fact owed more to him being the only son of their lost brother, Jack, than to his general likability. They did like him, of course, just not as much as they loved him. After Jack's death in the wreck on Buffalo Mountain, Gabe's mother had remarried and moved to Knoxville as quickly as striking a match. But 15-year-old Gabe had refused to go with her, insisting on staying with Seda and Opal until he graduated from high school. After that, he immediately went into the mines and steadily worked his way up to be a manager for one of the big companies. He had made his own way in the world and had not looked back. Now he had moved off to a subdivision in Lexington, much to the disappointment of the sisters and his own wife. But he still checked in on them regularly, usually by phone or when he was in the county for business. There was a knock at the front door just as Lily was returning from storing the last couple of coats. Before she had time to put her hand on the knob, the door opened to reveal Freddie Mullins, who had not been invited, although his mother had. B. Mullins and the Morgan sisters had lived here as neighbors their whole lives.
What do you say, Lilybug?
Even though she was too old to be called by this nickname, Lily wanted to tell him that she was a sophomore at Berea College now, that she was the president of Bereans for Appalachia and secretary of the SGA, and was known around campus as the girl who knew all the old ballads. She felt like telling him that she had spent the night with one of her high school teachers shortly after graduation, and before he had the chance to hurt her, she had quit him. She wanted to say to him that she was a grown-ass woman. But what use was there in telling Freddie anything? He was always stoned. Pain pills had taken control of him. Still, she had always liked Freddie. In some way, he had always been too smart for his own good. He had never known what to do with his intelligence, and that had destroyed him. She thought it a terrible waste that he had become just a dopehead.
You shouldn't come in on Granny while you're wasted, Freddie.
Is it Gabe? Come on in, Freddie. Bee's in the living room.
Freddie wrapped Seda up in his lanky frame and overpowering scent of cigarette smoke. When he stepped back, he was about to cry, of course. Freddie had always been so tender-hearted, especially when he was stoned.
I've missed you so bad. You was always so good to me when I was little. The only person who ever was.
Just as Seda took Freddie's arm and directed him into where the others sat, the door opened, revealing Gabe.
Little Lilybug.
Lily ignored this too. These people would always treat her like a child.
Granny and Aunt Opal thought you'd never get here. You worried them to death.
Well, they forget my wife takes 3 hours to get ready.
Greta slipped in the front door behind him and shoved it shut against the code as if a ghost was on her heels. Greta had always had a certain kind of grace about her. She was tall and elegant, head held high, shoulders back, always well-dressed, but never in an overbearing way. She smelled wonderful, a fine mist of her sweet perfume always trailing behind her, but never too much. Lily took a deep breath of her when they hugged. As far as Lily was concerned, Greta was Gabe's saving grace. It was clear the woman adored him, so there must be something good about him. And the way he looked at Greta shined out from him, too. Then Seda and Opal were upon them like a couple of red birds pecking at breadcrumbs on the snow. First, they covered up Gabe in embraces and their small voices. Seda held him by the crooks of his arms, and peered up at him. Opal kissed him on the cheek. The highlights of their lives had been when he was a child. Sometimes they would sit up late and make peanut butter candy and watch westerns on the old movies channel. They tiptoed around on summer mornings to let him sleep late, and he arose to breakfast of homemade biscuits and gravy, pork loin, fried apples, fried potatoes. These scents always drew him back to Free Creek and caused an ache, a pining he could not understand.
Is it getting bad out?
Gabe smiled at the accent still living in her mouth. Most of the young people he knew talked like television, but Lily had always been determined to never lose her way of speaking, as if it was some kind of symbolic act.
Yes, it sure is. No salt trucks out yet either. It's bound to get worse.
I'll take your coat.
He peeled off the Carhartt and handed it to her. She wondered why a businessman would need a working man's coat, but didn't say anything. He ran a coal company, but dressed like a coal miner. She felt this was a very dishonest masquerade and had to hold back from telling him as much.
How's school going?
Oh, I love it.
Better be careful up there. They like to educate the sense right out of people.
Lily ignored this, but the bone in her jaw tightened. She had promised her granny she wouldn't talk politics, especially within earshot of Gabe.
Got your eye on a good boy yet?
Boys are the least of my worries.
Lily's mind was often boggled that men of Gabe's generation still thought that a young woman's only concern was to get married. Those days are over, she felt like saying. Gabe felt his face grow red and knew he had made a mistake, but he was also chafed by her tone. He knew she didn't care about finding a man, and he wanted to acknowledge that with sarcasm, but she had misunderstood. He shed the heavy boots and stood them neatly against the wall. He dug his billfold out of his back pocket and plucked a $50 bill from within, folded it between two fingers, and held it out to Lily, a peace offering. Besides, her mother, his cousin, but more like a sister, had run off with some man, and really, he should do something to help Lily, shouldn't he? She had always been like a niece to him.
Since I didn't see you at Christmas time this year, we didn't get to give you a present.
Lily was struck by the notion that he wasn't being generous so much as trying to make her feel beholden. This didn't feel like a Christmas present to her, but a bribe. For what? She was unsure, to like him, to ignore his sexism and arrogance.
That's all right.
Lily certainly could have used that money. Her grandmother was very good to her, but Lily tried to never buy any new clothes or much of anything at all because she knew how little money both Seda and Opal drew each month.
Why not?
I don't want your money, Gabe.
He noticed the lack of uncle at the front of his name, so he crumpled the 50 into his pocket and stomped away. He would never understand this generation and their entitlement.
Thanks, though.
Gabe stood in the wide doorway to the living room and surveyed the crowd, most of whom had turned their attention to Greta. She always lit up a room and drew everyone to her. There was a crowd of cousins and neighbors and a couple of musicians who had been students of Sada's and had gone on to have careers in traditional music. She had told Gabe on the phone that she was going to organize a true old Christmas party with square dancing and old-time music. He never had liked that sort of thing. Gabe was a tall, stout man. His high cheekbones had always made him attractive to others, and they directed one's attention to his broad forehead, which gave him the air of intelligence. His eyes were off-putting, though. Their coal blackness made them appear to always be burning their gaze into whomever was in front of him. And his eyes were incapable of hiding the way he felt about things. If he was bored with someone, it showed. Or if he was aggravated or restless or angry. There was some kind of brutal honesty in having a feature that would not allow him to outright lie about things. But he counted this as a curse more than a blessing. Now, Seda was instructing the musicians to carry most of the furniture into the back bedroom. She had made the transition to being friends with her previous students, and even though they were full adults now, they deferred to her as if they were still in 7th grade. They couldn't bring themselves to call by her first name. The banjo player kept a bright smile on his face, causing him to be nicknamed Sunshine long ago. He was a lanky fellow, as tall and thin as a plank of lumber. Because of this, Sunshine bent at the waist anytime he talked to anyone to compensate for their own lack of height. The fiddler was unmemorable, one of those women who refused to wear makeup and wear old gingham dresses simply to look the part of an old-time musician. Gabe couldn't fathom why anyone would want to look so plain. He found the woman pretentious and offensive, although she didn't say a word, and struck him as being perfectly happy to saw on her fiddle all night without a care in the world. The musicians shuffled by him as they carried out the coffee table, covered in trembling glass whatnots, small foxes, redbirds, dogs, and the recliner where Opal was often perched watching her stories on the television.
That's what we always used to do when I was growing up. Pack the furniture out of the front room to make way for dancing. Tonight we're going to do everything like the old days.
Now, you all won't try to go back to Lexington tonight in this bad weather. I won't allow it.
We rented a hotel room in Manchester.
Manchester? I didn't even know they had a hotel.
Yes, brand new. Lots of natural gas men over there these days. They stay sold out, the front desk woman was telling me.
Well, it'll be too bad to drive back to Manchester, too. That parkway is awful dangerous once it gets slick out. They never salt it until daylight.
We're in the 4x4.
You know he's always prepared now, Opal. He has to have the latest toys.
Opal laughed, and Greta kept her gaze on the old woman, drawing her in with that way she had. That's why people loved Greta so much. She made everyone feel like the only person in the world. Now, Seda stood in the middle of the living room floor where the coffee table had so recently squatted. She cleared her throat and thrust her hand into the air, an old habit from teaching that signified that they should stop talking. The murmurs faded away to silence.
It's time to eat. Now, since we're doing everything in the old way tonight, I'll ask that the men get their plates first.
There was a quiet twitter between Lily and the plain nameless fiddler, to which the old aunt immediately said,
Oh, now, girls, this is not a statement on women's rights, just old times.
A ribbon of laughter slithered through the crowd. Only then did Gabe notice Molly Blanton, because her chest puffed up at the suggestion of men being superior, although her face was lit in a bright contrast of happiness. That was the thing about Molly. She could cuss you black and blue and never look unpleasant. She and Gabe had grown up together, playing in the creek, building dams, catching crawdads, and endless stacking and unstacking of rocks. This is what all Holler children did. In every grade together from first until they graduated from Crow County High. Molly had married young and seemed assigned to a quiet life in the very place she had known all of her life. But then she got divorced and was raising 2 babies as a waitress at Pizza Inn, and nothing changed for her for years until they started the blasting up past her house. Then the fish kill had happened, and suddenly Molly was marching on Frankfurt and then the White House, getting arrested at the EPA. Now she had been in magazines, and the Louisville paper had called her a folk hero. Even tonight, she had had to wear her stupid I Love Mountains button to rub her politics in everyone's face. Lots of people hereabouts wouldn't speak to her. To do so would be to betray the industry, after all. But the Morgan sisters had always been yellow dog Democrats, and Gabe had a suspicion that even though they did not discuss politics with him, they were secretly members of Molly's organization. He sickened at the thought of his old aunts giving up part of their hard-earned pensions to fund a group who laid down in front of bulldozers and invaded the governor's office to get attention. Molly saw that his eyes had lit on her, and she nodded at him. There was delighted arrogance in the acknowledgement, though, so Gabe darted his eyes away.
So we'll just walk around the table and fill our plates, and we'll all come in here and eat off our laps. But first, I want to ask Gabe to ask the blessing.
They knew as well as he did that he went to church more for business than anything else, but still, this was his birthright as the eldest man in the family.
Well, I don't know how good a blessing I can give, but I'll try.
Oh, hush. Go on so we can eat.
All right, then.
All heads bowed, even those possessing brains that didn't believe in a thing, and Gabe knew he had to say something more than a prayer because of the lot who were gathered here tonight. They always made their voices heard one way or another, and now he would.
Blessed Lord God, we are so thankful to be gathered with these saintly women tonight. Our country is turning away from you and becoming so lost. But as long as my aunts are living, some bit of the old times and good manners will remain, Lord. when people took care of one another and these drugs and laziness hadn't overtaken our young people.
There was a murmur of nodding or shaking heads that went around the room, some in agreement and others in amazement at his ignorance.
Lord, we are thankful to you for the progress you have given us to keep our economy going, to make us a living here in the mountains. But we need your help to get people back on track. Education is good, but we have so many people who go off and get the God educated right out of them today, Lord.
Amen.
Even with his eyes clenched shut, Gabe thought it was his ancient cousin Herschel, whom he had spied earlier, propped up in the corner like an animated corpse. Now Gabe felt he was on a roll, so he powered forward.
And remember all those who have gone on before us tonight, all the ones who love this house like their own home. My own daddy and Uncle Dave, Sweet Fern and Goldie, and all the others we have loved and cherished. We won't linger on the dead, but be thankful for all the living here tonight to join in fellowship, and always remember and honor your blessed name. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Amen.
Then there was much commotion as the men loaded their plates. The Morgan sisters had brought out real plates tonight, although big gatherings like this usually called for styrofoam platters that bent in the middle from the excess of food. The men made terrible jokes and took their time. Women talked and laughed behind them with some amount of impatience. The plain woman jig-jagged a little tune on her fiddle, standing in the middle of the floor with a pained look on her face. The sissified Sunshine plucked at his banjo, smiling maniacally at the plain fiddler the whole time, apparently determined to eat with the women. Gabe felt the music was a countdown, like a terrible jingle played on game shows while people made their decisions. There was plenty to choose from: spiral ham glistening with golden pineapple rings, bowls heaving with mashed potatoes, potato salad, slaw, baked beans, fried corn, an enormous offering of chicken and dumplings. Seda had watched Opal's old hands pinching off the dumplings earlier this evening and felt like throwing her apron up over her face and running off to cry. They had been young together, after all, and now they were old and shriveling and shrinking, and a meatloaf smothered in ketchup, undersea salad, hash brown casserole dressing woven through with mouth-watering sage. Most important, shucky beans that the sisters themselves had dried in the back window of Seda's Ford Escort. Folks rarely made shucky beans anymore, but Opal and Seda were experts. They had not forgotten. After a while, the women had made their plates as well, and everyone sat in a circle in the living room, bent over their laps as they ate and chattered. The conversation moved like a mist around the room, private in its pocket, animated here, an occasional phrase said that drew everyone in, then quiet as people fell into their own talks with those nearest them, and then another topic that caused the whole group to listen or join in.
We don't want anybody to be shy about going back for seconds.
No need to worry about that. I believe we will all founder tonight.
There was much merrymaking. Peals of laughter occasionally uncurled themselves above the people's gathered heads, bumped at the high corners of the walls, lay flat against the ceiling, hovering. Everyone was engaged except for Gabe, who observed. He was not an observant person by nature, but here, amongst the people he had known all his life, who had cared for him and would do anything for him, he felt like a stranger in another country. He could not quite say why. They numbered 15 and were crammed into the small front room, but somehow the crowded nature made things even more convivial. Their beliefs were diverse, but they had managed to live together in this community for generations as a kind of family. Gabe didn't much fancy being around people who disagreed with him.
Old Christmas always reminds me of all the people I knew in this place who have passed on. I always loved Old Christmas best of all. They always told us the animals could talk at midnight on Old Christmas, you know. But there was so much celebrating throughout the day, shooting fireworks and pistols and big suppers and so much company and music that all the children fell asleep before the magic hour rolled around.
Except me. I never could go to sleep. I always took the big eye. But I didn't want to go out to the barn because I knew the mystery was better than the thing itself.
I wish I had lived back then.
It wasn't all magic and celebration.
Still, there was a connection to everything that had been lost. We studied about the bartering society to the cash base, the transfer from the agrarian to the industrial.
The agro. What's that now?
Lily glanced around to Molly, the one person she knew to fully understand her. Molly let her eyes linger on Lily's to suggest her alliance. Molly had not been off to college, but she had read everything. Books teetered in every corner of her home, and she had become an expert researcher on the internet. Lily had done an oral history on her last year, and while Molly was in the kitchen making tea, Lily had strolled around the living room, lingering her pointing finger against the many spines of the books.
I worry about what will happen to the world once your generation takes control.
Some would argue we've already taken control. Look at the gay rights movement, for instance. My generation made those things happen.
Yes, and I'm plumb ashamed of how behind the times our governor is on that.
Now, I don't want any talks of politics tonight.
People your age.
You heard me, Gabe.
Opal sensed her nephew's embarrassment and knew an easy out for him, so she went to Gabe.
See if you can't do something with Freddie, Gabe, honey.
Gabe was glad for this diversion. Escorting Freddie out of the room would allow him to escape the inevitable ballad singing. He hurried over and extended his hand to Freddie, who looked up at him with puzzlement.
Let's go on out to the porch and have a smoke, Freddie.
Freddie's eyes were as red and watery as canned tomatoes when he looked up. Gabe flashed back to their childhood together here on this creek, all the various ways he had tortured Freddie for a laugh. He felt a momentary surge of guilt, but then reckoned that the weak ask for their punishments in life. We must all puff up and fight back if we don't want to be victims.
Well, I just had a cigarette.
But then his mother was pushing at his elbow and encouraging him to go. She was no foe and knew that Gabe was simply trying to save his aunts the embarrassment of Freddie talking over everyone. Freddie relented, and as the two men sauntered out of the front room, Silas stood and shushed everyone. Before they had even made it out onto the cold porch, a silence befell the room, and Lily began to sing.
I've been a foreign lander for 7 years or more. Among the brave commanders will I be sold and roared. I've conquered all my enemies on land and on the sea, but you, my dearest jewel, 'tis you who have conquered me. I cannot build a ship of love without wood of trees. The ship would burst asunder should I prove false to thee. If ever I prove false, love, the elements would moan, the fire would turn to ice, love, the seas rage and grow.
Gabe had not heard Lily sing since she was a very small child. He was amazed by how old her voice sounded, something ancient and wise. He thought she might be possessed by someone who had lived long ago. Even her body changed when she arched herself into the words of the song. And how did she understand such pining anyway, Gabe wondered, then realized he had missed her growing up completely. He could not help but listen as he closed the front door behind them. But immediately there was silence in the lonesome scene of the snow-covered holler before him. Freddie lit his cigarette and did not speak. Inside, the entire room was mesmerized by the song, by the words and her singing, the way she stood, a young woman taken away by this old tune that had been penned by some agonized person who would never be known. Outside, Gabe heard none of this. He studied the old cedar in the front yard, its boughs bent low with snow. He had looked on this scene many times in his life, wondering why his mother had left him here with his aunts, wishing he was anybody else in the world. The aunts claimed that the cedar had been planted by his Cherokee great-grandmother, but who knew if that was true? Everyone around here claimed to be half Cherokee and half Irish.
You know, he was a mean little bastard when we were kids. A real mean little Banny Rooster bully.
I still am, I reckon.
And no reason to be. Not a damn reason in this world.
What's so damn funny?
I was remembering that time Molly whooped your ass over me. I bet you ain't forgot that.
Gabe took hold of the doorknob roughly, leaving Freddie to his own humoring. When he entered the house again, it was as if he had burst in on chaos. The banjo player and fiddler were playing a reel, and Opal was calling a square dance. Everyone had scooted their chairs back to the walls as far as they would go, and there was room for 3 couples to do the Virginia reel crowdedly in the middle of the living room. Gabe couldn't take his eyes from Greta. The elegant curve of her neck, the arch of her back, the smile that played on her lips as she looked Seda in the eye, as she had been taught to do during square dances in school and had never forgotten. Eyes green as clover. She was too good for him, and he knew it. He knew it every day of his life. They had had a terrible fight recently, and she'd told him how tired she was of his desire to have more. That's how she had said it. All you want is more, 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 Gabe. When will it ever be enough? He had stomped away and gone out onto the porch, which offered no peace because of the constant traffic sizzling by on Versailles Road. He wanted to go back in and tell her that he had bought so many things to impress her, to give her more, to provide them both with what they had not had growing up. She had been raised so poor over on Lost Mountain, and the only way he could equal that beautiful curve of her neck, or the cool place behind her knee, or the perfection of her lips, or her goodness, was to show her how successful he was. But he couldn't say that. He never had been able to say a thing that he really felt. The reel was over. A round of applause circled the room. Seda, in the middle of it, completely alive, the happiest Gabe had seen her in years. Greta came toward him, her hand on her neck as she breathed hard.
Lord, what a workout.
His collar had become twisted, and she reached out to fix it, then let her thumb linger on the cleft in his chin. She had often said that that was what first drew her to him. He knew she loved him, but he didn't know why. Sometimes he doubted it. But in moments like these, when she touched him out of the blue and let her eyes sit on his for just a second, he could feel her affection, even if he thought himself unworthy of it.
We need 2 couples and 2 squares.
Couples moved out into the middle of the room. Before Gabe even realized it, Molly was hovering over him, smiling down like an executioner.
Come dance with me, Gabe Morgan.
Gabe looked to Greta as if she might save him, but she laughed and nudged him out onto the dancing space.
Take him, Molly. He needs a good turnabout the floor.
So there was no way out of it. While Seda explained the cause, Molly talked to him.
I have a crow to pick with you.
With me? What is it then?
I know we all have to make a living, but you don't have to make it on the backs of others. You ought to be ashamed of yourself.
Why should I be ashamed of myself?
I'm ashamed of you. I didn't think you were a traitor to your own people.
A feeling of perplexity washed over him. Him, a traitor, when she was out marching in the streets and helping to shut down coal companies. The music was starting up, and he had no idea what to do since he had not been able to listen to Seda's instructions. He moved to let go of Molly's hands and leave her alone there on the dance floor, but she had laced her fingers firmly through his.
I'll tell you what to do.
All join hands and circle to the south. Get a little moonshine in your mouth.
Then they were one big circle, moving in unison, and there was a beauty in that which Gabe could not even see. When they partnered again, Molly's entire demeanor had changed in such a way that it had shaped her body into something soft and more relaxed.
If I don't give you a hard time, Gabe, who will? Won't you come to Lost Mountain with me just one time and let me show you what I'm talking about, Gabe? You're from these mountains. You can't go on tearing them down. If you could just come and listen to us.
I have better things to do with my time.
Greta's from over there in those parts. I'm taking folks on a tour over there in April when the red buds are blooming. I bet Greta hasn't been in a long while.
We're going on a cruise in April.
You go to the Bahamas instead of visiting your own country.
I'm sick of my own country.
Mercifully, they were called back into a large circle, then told to go to the center and whoop out in celebration.
Woo!
Gabe didn't holler out, although the others did, as if they were having the times of their lives. All the while, he felt Molly's eyes burning into his face, and finally, at long last, The song was over. He was free. But then she was on his arm again, leaning up, and she whispered right in his ear, "Traitor." As she pulled away, there was a smile on her lips. And in that moment, he realized that she had to smile to keep her anger at him contained. Then she was gone as if she had evaporated into thin air. He found himself beside B. Mullins, who lit in talking to him as if they had been in conversation a long time.
I never did get over that Dublin mine disaster. You know, my brother was killed in it. They built a big memorial up there and opened it 4 years ago, but I could never get Freddie to take me to see it. And you know, Gabe, there was a big snow on the ground, just like this, the day the mine fell.
He just left her, chattering away. The past, always the damn past. That's why he couldn't stand to come down here anymore than he had to. The past was everywhere, breathing out of the rocky clefts of the mountains, standing like mist above the creeks, hauled down the highways in the backs of coal trucks. The past and the dead, always present. Those two things would last when there was nothing else but the lonesomeness. He realized he was at the table where the desserts had been laying out. A better-than-church cake, a banana pudding, fried apple pies, apricot nectar cake, buckeyes, a Bible cake, peanut butter candy, a chocolate pie. The thought of taking another bite sickened him.
Did you and Molly have a falling out?
No, why? Did she say we did?
Not in so many words, but I gathered.
She was trying to talk me into going to see Lost Mountain, and I said I wouldn't.
Oh, let's go, Gabe. I'd love to see the home place again before it falls down.
You go if you want to.
The light in her face dimmed, yet did not go out completely. Molly hustled out of the back bedroom, shrugging herself into her red topcoat as she plowed across the room.
Are you leaving before dessert then, Molly?
Yes, I'm heading on out. I'm full as a tick.
Oh, but it's too bad out. There must be half a foot of snow and they haven't cleared the roads.
I'm only a couple miles away from where I need to be.
Gabe knew what his wife expected him to say, so he did begrudgingly.
I have a 4-wheel drive. I can take you home if you're bound and determined to leave.
I am bound and determined, but I'm able to take care of myself. Thank you.
She hugged Greta as if they might never see one another again, holding on a beat too long so that Greta eyed her with puzzlement once she pulled away.
Go on and enjoy yourselves.
Well, you're a queer one, running off just when the sweets are served.
Blessings.
What a strange bird.
There was one more dance as a small group loaded their plates with many slivers of the various desserts, and then they all sat in the living room, circle of chairs, and gorged themselves on the sweets. There was much talk of gluttony. A mighty gale of icy wind that shook the house and sent bits of snow pecking at the window glass like little blue gravels signaled the unraveling of the successful party. This great wind seemed to remind everyone that they should get going before the weather grew worse, even though most of them were within walking distance. When Freddie escorted his mother, Bee, out, he glanced back at Gabe. Their eyes touched with some kind of understanding. Freddie had finally said what he wanted to Gabe, and now they could move forward. Bee did not tell him goodbye. Groups of two or three left at a time amongst many embraces from all those gathering except Gabe, who did not offer himself to hug, and was fine with a nod of the chin to say goodbye. Before long, Gabe found himself part of a strange, disembodied tableau. He was sitting alone in the living room with the gray-faced Herschel. Greta and Seda had stopped halfway to the kitchen to talk about something that looked very important and serious. And just inside the kitchen, Opal was chattering with her old music students and Lily as they stacked dishes in the sink. He could glimpse them moving back and forth like parts of the same machine. Herschel was going on about old times, about Gabe's grandfather.
He's the best man I ever did know.
But Gabe was half listening. He found himself surprisingly melancholy at the suddenly emptied house. Moments ago, there had been so many people, and now there was a handful. This left an inexplicable sadness moving in over him, like gray snow clouds overtaking a marble blue winter sky.
Oh, he thought the world of you, harm did.
Hiram, Gabe wanted to say, for it had always bothered him that people distorted his grandfather's name in such a way. But instead, he had a sudden thought.
Do you remember his mule, the one he called John F.?
Named it after Kennedy.
Remember those sorghum pulls, Herschel?
Gabe could see it all in his mind. The old bony-hipped mule walked in circles for hours and hours, turning the mill while all the people of his childhood took turns feeding the grass to the rollers to squeeze out the sorghum.
The last time we had a pull, I must have been about 12 years old.
Oh, yes. That was another lifetime.
His grandfather had died, and the sorghum pulls ended, and then his parents died, and he had forgotten the rich amber taste of sorghum, and the mountains had grown closer and then farther away with his breathing, moving closer, away, like a heartbeat.
But every October comes sorghum pull time. For the rest of his life, that old mule walked in circles for the whole month. Remember that?
I had forgot.
Gabe did not hear him, nor did he hear the singing that had started up in the kitchen. The young man called Sunshine had started singing a tune at Sada's request.
And then that one fall, John F. wouldn't stop walking in circles. He wore the mud hole in the field, moving around and around and around in the same place. So they had to put him down.
Gabe had forgotten that, although it had once defined him. He had come home from school and ran out to see John F., finding only an empty lot. Oh, the stillness, the quiet. Black skeletal trees on the gray mountainside clicking together like bones. When he ran back to the house and asked about the old mule they had told him, he lost his mind and he had to be put down. Don't be tore up now, little man. And then Gabe heard them in the kitchen right now. The tall young man and Lily were singing together.
All the flowers of the mountain.
They sang more. All three of them joined together, their voices like birds lifting and beating against the low ceilings of the house, unable to flee.
I will surely find another to pull out mountain time all around the moon and weather.
Just as the woman brought the fiddle beneath her chin and began to soul out an instrumental verse, Gabe saw that Greta was crying. She wiped at her eyes with quick swipes, as if she did not want anyone to know. And he could see her even though she was turned away from him. He would have known she was weeping anyway, just by the way she was holding her shoulders. He had never felt more distant from her or closer.
And the trees are sweetly blooming, and the wild mountain tide goes around the moon and weather.
There was a brief space of silence when they finished, as if everyone was too moved to speak. But then Opal was clapping, and the three singers gave a little laugh because they knew how wonderful it had been. And Herschel was rising noisily, saying he had to get on home. But Gabe could not take his eyes away from Greta. He had seen the way her shoulders trembled, the way she was struggling to not completely break down. He had seen her, and now everything was different. They said their goodbyes. Greta embraced everyone, gave them all a kiss. No one commented on her tear-stained face. Music did that to folks, no matter. None of them offered Gabe more than a shaking hand as a way of saying goodbye. Not even his niece, Lily. Just a polite smile, a tight-lipped, except for the Morgan sisters, who covered him in a double hug, tears on their soft faces, tears for his parents, his grandparents, for everything he embodied to them. He knew that they did not care as much about him as they did for all that he had come before them. He was the last of the old days, the youngest one who could still recall the sorghum pools and John F. Free Creek before they all had telephones and the internet and 1,000 channels on their TVs. That is who he was to his aunts, nothing more. They rode in near silence to Manchester, the four-wheel drive grinding over the parkway, which was caked in inches of snow that lessened the slickness of the ice beneath. The headlights seemed to barely penetrate the black night, illuminating only the huge snowflakes that continued to pummel down. Greta watched the white shapes of the mountains as they drifted by, and when he started to speak, she said in a small, quiet voice,
Concentrate on the road, Gabe. We should have stayed the night with them instead of driving back to Manchester. Why do we have to stay in a hotel anyway? They had room.
She said this in such a way that he knew she did not want him to answer. Then she turned on the radio. There was nothing but talk of the blizzard. Snow has settled over the entire region, the newscaster said. We've not seen a winter storm like this in a long while. The parking lot at the hotel was full of cars and too brightly lit. The large snowflakes fell like feathers in the white shafts of light. The lobby smelled of the chlorine from the indoor pool that lay still and unnaturally blue just beyond the front desk. Even though the hotel was only 2 stories, Gabe pushed the button for the elevator, and they were silent as the metal box clicked toward the second floor. The room was featureless and a sterilized kind of clean. Gabe flopped down on the bed atop the duvet and watched via the hallway mirror as Greta took off her earrings and unzipped her dress at the bathroom vanity. Her face was so weary that he had trouble gathering his words, but finally he called out to her.
You look tired.
I am a little.
Are you sick?
No, just tired.
Freddie Mullins is a real mess. I can't believe he came to their house tonight. Most likely stoned.
Greta strolled past and went to the window to pull the curtains, but instead looked out on the snowy mountainside, well lit in the unnatural streetlights. Her face was whitened by the scene she was watching. Gabe found himself increasingly troubled by how distracted she remained. Usually she was so agreeable, so ready to chit-chat and deconstruct cocktail parties they attended in Lexington. There was always something at those parties that rubbed her the wrong way. She said she felt like a foreigner there.
I thought he was kind of pitiful.
Gabe felt a stirring desire at the bottom of his stomach and radiating down into his lap. She was so beautiful there. He wanted to stand behind her and press himself against her, bring his hand up to cup over one of her breasts while he leaned down to kiss her shoulder. She would turn to him then and remember him, and he would not have lost her. As if she had read his mind, she came to bed then and sat beside him and leaned down and kissed him on the forehead. He drew his arm up around her back, pulling her closer, chewing at her lips, drawing in her scent. But he knew that she was not there at all.
What is it? Tell me.
I can't stop thinking about that song, Wild Mountain Time.
She stood and crossed back to the window, looking out at the mountain again. She had not drawn the curtains. Suddenly, she was weeping. She put both her hands up to cover her face, and her neck rolled forward. Her whole body seemed to collapse in on itself. She was crying so hard now that he could hear her. Gabe sat up in the bed.
What about that song? Why has it upset you so much?
She wiped at her face and revealed it to the white light once again.
Why?
I'm so thinking about someone who used to sing that song to me.
Who?
He was completely in the dark, but now he felt a sort of relief. She had probably been reminded of her grandmother or her mother or someone, something from her childhood related to the song. He didn't know why he had thought it might have a thing to do with him.
A boy I used to know at Lost Mountain. Before I ever knew you.
The relief passed from Gabe, and a dull anger gathered at the back of his neck.
Were you in love with this boy?
We were just kids, 16 or so. His name was Michael Burns. He used to sing that song, Wild Mountain Time. He was real tender-hearted, not like the other boys.
Gabe didn't say a word, and it seemed to him that she didn't want him to, as if she were articulating all of this for her own self. And he didn't want her to think he was interested in this sensitive boy. He wanted her to stop talking.
I can see him plain as day. He had big, dark eyes. Everybody always talked about his eyes. There was something in them that showed everything he was feeling.
Sounds like you were in love with him and that you never got over him.
We used to go walking. You know how it used to be, holler people walked of the evening?
And he noted that she said of an evening instead of in the evening. Another thing people in Lexington would not understand. And although he refused to talk that way anymore, he did know.
I guess that's why you'd like to go back to Lost Mountain with Molly then.
What? Why?
Gabe shrugged. He hated himself for this jealousy, but he couldn't help it.
How the hell do I know? Maybe to see him again?
He's dead. He died when he was only 18.
What of?
In the Dublin mines. He was the youngest one.
All Gabe could think was that he had been married to this woman for all of these years, worshiping her really. And all this time she had been comparing him to some dead teenage coal miner. He saw himself for what he was, a man who had never thought he was good enough for his wife, a man who had done everything to buy her the things that would make her happy, not knowing that nothing ever would. He turned his face away so she couldn't see his shame.
You were in love with him then?
I guess I was, in the way that teenagers can be in love. It was a long, long time ago. Another lifetime, and in a way, I think he died on account of me.
How could that be?
Oh, he wanted to run off to Nashville and get married and become a country singer, and I wouldn't go. I wanted to do something more. I wanted to go to college and make something of myself. So I quit him, and he took a job in the mines the day we graduated high school. I think he stayed here to wait on me.
All of this was news to Gabe. Somehow he had rarely thought of his wife's life before she met him, other than her childhood of poverty. Greta sighed in the way that people have when they are finished talking.
Poor old feller. He really was in love with me, I think. And for me, it was just kind of a puppy love, you know?
She laughed a little at last, but this made Gabe feel even worse, especially when he realized that she was not laughing, but crying again. She was choking with sobs.
When he died with all those men, I felt like it was my fault. It took me a long time to get over it, and I guess in some way I never did, because tonight when they sang Wild Mountain Time, it was as fresh as could be again.
She sat down on the edge of the bed and was quiet. Gabe didn't speak. After a while, she lay down beside him, and he slipped his arm around her waist, feeling her breathing become calmer until he realized she had fallen asleep. He watched her sleep for a while in the soft light. She had had a life before him. She had studied on that, and maybe she had not told him the whole story. Perhaps he didn't even understand his own story, much less hers. He couldn't wrap his mind around all the different ways he had felt tonight. Thinking of all those people square dancing made him feel a kind of anger he couldn't place. He didn't know why the memory of that old mule walking in circles had settled down on him with such a thick sadness, or why he could see death in the faces of his aunts. He pictured himself in the near future. One of the aunts on her deathbed, the other sitting in a chair beside her, Gabe trying to offer some comfort. When the aunts died, so would his whole childhood. So would all of the past. Something of his being would be darkened forever. That time would come very soon, and then everything he knew would begin to disappear. Yes, that would happen very soon, He was certain. The night was growing colder, easing through the walls. But the thought of death made him cold as well. He knew that one by one, they were all dying. Not only his old aunts, but even Greta, even himself. He thought of how long Greta had carried that dead boy with her, the weight of that. She had loved him. He could tell by the way she had spoken, by the way she had cried. He found that tears had filled his own eyes. He couldn't remember the last time he had been so overwhelmed with grief. Perhaps when he found John F.'s empty lot and had been told the circling mule had been put down. Maybe that long ago. Compelling his grief was his thought that he had never loved Greta properly. Tears were dripping so heavily from his eyes, they were wetting his pillow. He didn't want to awake Greta with his grief, so he eased from the bed and went to the window. Through his distorted gaze, he imagined he could see Michael Burns standing out there at the foot of the mountain, looking up at their window. Other forms were nearby too. His father, grandparents, his ancestors. The animals talked on Old Christmas, so why shouldn't the dead be able to go out roving? He felt that his own body and soul had approached that thin veil between the country of the living and the country of the dead. His own identity was facing into that gray world. He was dissolving, dwindling. A heaving wind shuddered against the hotel and sent the snowflakes to tapping against the window. It had begun to snow harder now. He watched the flakes until his crying stopped and his eyes were clear. Yes, the news reports were right. Snow was settling all over Appalachia. It was falling on the skeletal trees of the hills, falling softly on the Cumberland Gap, where so many had trod through to the west, softly falling on the memorial to the Dublin mine disaster, upon every part of the lonely church graveyard where Michael Burns lay buried. The snow lay drifted on the crooked headstones, on the barren thorns of the rose bushes that had been planted there. Something in Gabe opened up as he heard the snow falling faintly through his own country and faintly falling, like the descent of every person's last breath upon all the living and the dead.
Thank you guys so much for joining us this afternoon. We really hope you enjoyed it as much as we had fun putting it on. I want to take this opportunity to express my endless gratitude to Silas House for agreeing to do this event with us. He's really gracious with his time. So we'll forever be grateful. Thank you so much. I also want to thank our musicians, Brian, Dinah, and Wendy. And then my incredible colleagues and the staff here at LPL, Emily, incredible talent with her singing. Thank you so much. She played Lily, and then Gabe, JP Johnson, Anna Marie, Greta, Heather Pritchard, Seda, and then Jonathan Dean, who played Freddie. Elizabeth, who played B. Mullins. And then Molly, Ashley. And good old Herschel, Rod. Thank you, guys. And then lastly, a huge thank you to Doug Tattershaw, who coordinates the events here in the Farish Theater. I really appreciate you. He did the lighting, and the sound engineer, and everybody that pitched in to the to get this event going. So I really appreciate everybody that had their input. There's more to come in terms of author visits here, so keep an eye out on our page, our events page. So all of our announcements are going to be on our website. Before we start to head upstairs to the third floor for the book signing, I think we have a little bit of time for a short Q&A. If you guys want to have, or if you have any questions for Silas, we are happy to take them at this time. So anybody with a...
How long did it take me to write this story? This story came really quickly. I just love the story of the dead so much, and I hope if you haven't read it that this will inspire you to read it. I read it every January 6th. That's the day it's set on. Old Christmas is the day of Epiphany. It's it's when the wise men were supposed to have reached Christ, and so for many years, especially in Appalachia, it was celebrated on January 6th. And I feel like that I just sat down one January 6th and wrote it because I just loved the story so much. And, of course, I polished it over many days and weeks after that. But this story came pretty easily. But again, the story is totally following the plot of the dead. I'm using my own language, and of course, I'm modernizing it and all that. But it's everything that happens in this story happens in the dead. Mm-hmm. It's such a strange structure, because 3/4 of the story is set in this party, and then the last act, the last quarter, is set in a hotel room. So it's a weird structure, and I love that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, to some degree, especially a story like this that is so heavily Appalachian. I'm often thinking on the people that in my family, people I grew up with. For instance, the character Molly Blanton was inspired by somebody that some of you may know. Her name's Terry Blanton. Does anybody know Terry? Yeah. She was very involved in the anti-mountaintop removal campaigns. And she's also based on a woman named Judy Bond out of West Virginia. So I was thinking about these two women activists who, were real active. They were like testifying in front of Congress and all this. And they were autodidacts, and they were just brilliant in every way, but so negated in their own communities and treated badly because of their activism.
Any other questions?
Well, I think, it shows up in this story. I think the thing that in my family, a real heartache for me is that my family used to be so huge, and now we're so small. Mostly because a lot of them have passed away, but also because politics has divided our family so badly, and some people no longer come because they can't trumpet their vitriol. And my mother is now the matriarch, and she won't allow it. God bless her. And so I think back a lot, when I was a child, how full my aunt, our Christmas is always at my aunt's little trailer. And it was just packed full of people. And sometimes we'd, carry the coffee table out, and late after all the presents and everything, they would, put on some Bob Seger and dance and have a good time. And, and it was just a big party in that way, full of people. It was like, I grew up in homes that were very much like Grand Central Station. There were a lot of cousins who were always coming, and community members. And one of the things that freaked me out when I came to Lexington, when I moved to Lexington, which I love living in Lexington. This story is kind of anti-Lexington, just because that's sort of the Appalachian point of view, But as an expat from Appalachia, I'm so thankful for Lexington. But one of the things that struck me when I first moved to Lexington is that people don't drop in. And where I'm from, like people, you'll be, you might be doing your work, but somebody drops in, you have to stop working and you just visit, and they might stay for 3 or 4 hours, and you have to feed them or whatever. And, but that's pretty unheard of here, right? And at where I'm from, it's not at all. And I sort of miss that, but in some ways I don't.
Do we have any other questions? All right. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you all.
All right. So we're going to do the book signing upstairs on the 3rd floor just because we have a little more space to work with. I'm sorry, what is it? His latest one, Lark Ascending, as well as a few backstock Southernmost I saw up there. I believe a few Clay's Quilt. So a few of his backstock. So it sure is.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
It sure is. So we can, Joseph Beth is going to be up there for the book sales. And I will let you know that Silas will sign one book just to keep the line going. We just want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to get their book signed before the library has to close at 5:00. So, so we'll just need to keep the pace going. But yeah, so everybody make your way up to the 3rd floor and we'll meet you up there. Thank you guys.